am Amelia, 35, and today I buried my husband, James, overseas. After 30 sleepless hours traveling home, I texted our family group chat, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" My brother Troy replied, "We are busy. Try Uber." Mom added, "Why didn't you plan better?" With trembling fingers, I typed, "No worries," while silently collapsing inside. I had no idea that within hours my family would be watching my tragedy unfold on their evening news. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt abandoned when you needed someone most. Before grief rewrote my entire existence, I had what most would call a picture-perfect life. James and I met during our sophomore year of college. He spilled coffee on my economics textbook, insisted on buying me a new one, and somehow managed to turn that disaster into a dinner date. We married after graduation and built a beautiful life together in Portland. I worked as a marketing director while James thrived as a software engineer. We had a cozy 2-story house with a garden I poured my heart into each spring. James always joked that my tomatoes could win state fair ribbons if I ever entered them. 10 years of marriage passed like a beautiful dream. We traveled whenever possible, had game nights with friends on Thursdays, and saved diligently for our future. James and I talked about starting a family soon. We had even converted the spare bedroom into a home office that could easily become a nursery when the time came. Everything changed last fall when James was offered a 6-month contract with an international tech company in Singapore. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one that would greatly advance his career and allow us to experience living abroad together. I arranged to work remotely for 3 months, planning to split our time between continents. We were so excited about the adventure ahead. The night before his departure, we had a special dinner at home. I still remember every detail: the soft music playing in the background, the flickering candles on our dining table, and the way James looked at me when he promised this opportunity would make our future even brighter. 6 months will fly by, he assured me, his fingers intertwined with mine, and then we will start the next chapter. We video called every day for the first 2 months. I flew out to visit him for 3 weeks around the holidays, and it felt like a second honeymoon. Singapore was beautiful, vibrant, and exciting. James showed me around the city, introduced me to his coworkers, and we explored neighboring islands on weekends. Everything seemed perfect. We even started seriously discussing trying for a baby when his contract ended. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was back in Portland when James complained about a severe headache during our morning video chat. "Probably just stress," he said, massaging his temples. "Big project deadline coming up." 8 hours later, his coworker called from James' phone. My husband had collapsed during a meeting and been rushed to the hospital. I booked the first available flight, but by the time I arrived 26 hours later, James was already in a coma. Brain aneurysm, the doctors explained. They performed emergency surgery, but the damage was catastrophic. For 5 days, I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, talking to him, praying for a miracle that never came. James never regained consciousness. He was only 37 years old. The nightmare of dealing with a foreign hospital system alone was overwhelming. Every form was confusing, every conversation was stilted through translation apps or rushed hospital interpreters. I called my family back home daily, desperate for emotional support, but our conversations were brief. "We are praying for you," they would say before explaining why they needed to rush off the phone. My mother asked if I had thought to purchase travel insurance. My brother Troy suggested I hire a local service to handle things so I could come home sooner, but I could not leave James, not like that. Not in a country where he knew no one but his coworkers. I stayed and handled everything myself. The paperwork for his death certificate took 3 full days and countless office visits. Arranging for a burial in Singapore, because the costs of transporting his body home were prohibitively expensive, required navigating unfamiliar customs and traditions. The funeral was small: some of his coworkers, a few expats he had befriended, and me. No family, no lifelong friends. My parents said the flight was too expensive on short notice. My brother had critical work obligations. I stood alone as they lowered my husband into the ground, a world away from everyone we loved. The financial strain was crushing. Our insurance covered some expenses, but international policies had limitations I never thought to examine before tragedy struck. I drained our savings and maxed out credit cards to pay for everything. Through it all, I kept updating my family, hoping someone would offer more than just brief condolences or practical suggestions. Looking back, I should not have been surprised by their response to my airport text. My family had always operated this way. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my parents attended but left immediately after my speech to get my brother to his baseball game. At my college graduation, they arrived late and left early. Even at my wedding, my mother spent more time fussing over Troy, who brought the wrong girlfriend, than celebrating my marriage. I had spent my entire life accommodating their priorities, making excuses for their behavior, and telling myself that family just had different ways of showing love now. Standing at my husband's grave on the other side of the world, I finally understood that some people simply do not have the capacity to put others first. Even in moments of desperate need, after the funeral, a whole new nightmare began. The Singaporean bureaucracy required multiple certified copies of the death certificate, each needing to be authenticated at different government offices scattered across the city. I spent 3 days shuttling between buildings in the tropical heat, standing in endless lines and trying to explain my situation through grief-choked words. Each night, I collapsed in our rented apartment, surrounded by James's clothes that still smelled like him. On my final morning in Singapore, I visited James's grave one last time. The cemetery was peaceful at dawn, birds singing in the lush trees overhead. I placed fresh flowers beside his simple headstone and sat on the dewy grass, telling him everything I was bringing home, his favorite books, the watch I had given him for our 5th anniversary, the collection of seashells we had gathered during our weekend trips to nearby beaches. "I will keep you alive in my heart," I whispered, pressing my palm against the cool marble. Every day for the rest of my life. My journey home stretched over 30 hours. First, a 6-hour delay in Singapore due to mechanical issues. Then, a missed connection in Tokyo requiring an overnight stay in an airport hotel. The final leg included turbulence so severe the flight attendants remained seated for 2 hours. By the time we began our descent into Portland, I had been traveling for more than a day straight, had barely eaten, and was running purely on grief and determination. During those endless travel hours, my mind kept returning to childhood memories, seeing patterns I had previously excused. When I was 8, I broke my arm falling from the backyard treehouse. My parents took me to the emergency room but left me with a neighbor to wait while they took Troy to his championship soccer game. "He cannot miss this," my mother explained. "The whole team is counting on him." When I earned a scholarship to my dream college, my father's first question was whether it would cost them anything. "Troy has expensive sports camps this summer," he reminded me. College was my choice, so I should handle the finances. I worked 2 jobs between classes while Troy attended an out-of-state university fully funded by our parents. In the end, I graduated with debt. My wedding day featured my mother criticizing my dress as impractical and my father complaining about the cost of the modest venue. Troy showed up an hour late to the ceremony. James had noticed their behavior but gently encouraged me to focus on our happiness instead. "We cannot change them," he said. "But we can choose how much power they have over our joy." Throughout the funeral arrangements in Singapore, I had called home almost daily. Most calls went to voicemail. When someone did answer, conversations were brief and focused on when I would return rather than how I was coping. My mother suggested I was dwelling on my grief by staying for the funeral rather than simply having James cremated immediately. Troy asked if James had life insurance before expressing concern about a work presentation he was struggling with. Despite this history, some irrational part of me believed that this tragedy, the absolute worst moment of my life, would finally elicit the compassion I had always craved from my family. Surely, they would recognize the magnitude of my loss and respond with the support I desperately needed. 3 days before my final flight home, I messaged our family group chat with my itinerary details. The responses were minimal. Thumbs up emojis from both parents and Troy asking if I was bringing any souvenirs. I clarified my arrival time twice more before boarding my final flight, hoping someone would offer to meet me at the airport. No one did, but I made one last attempt as we touched down on American soil. "My brothers, we are busy." Triuber felt like a physical blow. My mother's "why didn't you plan better?" made me question whether I had ever truly mattered to them at all. In that moment, sitting in a cramped airplane seat surrounded by passengers eager to disembark, I made a silent promise to James and myself. This would be the last time I expected water from an empty well. Portland International Airport buzzed with afternoon activity as I made my way through customs. The fluorescent lighting hurt my eyes after so many sleepless nights, and every announcement over the PA system made me flinch. I navigated the crowded terminal on autopilot, my body present while my mind remained thousands of miles away with James. I stood at the baggage claim, watching suitcases circle endlessly on the conveyor belt. Mine were easy to identify, one large black suitcase containing my clothes and 2 others packed with James's possessions. The things I could not bear to leave behind: his favorite sweater, the leather journal I had given him last Christmas, photo albums, the coffee mug he used every morning, fragments of our life together that now represented everything I had left of him. My phone buzzed with another message in the family chat. I opened it, hoping someone had reconsidered. "Troy, seriously, sis, we cannot rearrange our schedules last minute. This is why planning exists. Mom, your father and I have dinner with the Hendersons tonight. We RSVP'd weeks ago. Dad, the forecast says rain later. Drive carefully when you get home. I stared at the screen, a familiar hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Not even a question about how I was doing or if I had arrived safely. No acknowledgement of what I had just been through. I typed a simple, "No worries, I understand." And though I did not understand at all, how could dinner plans or social obligations outweigh the need to support your daughter who had just buried her husband alone? The weight of the suitcases made me stagger as I loaded them onto a cart. James's possessions suddenly felt impossibly heavy, both physically and emotionally. As I struggled toward the exit, one of the wheels on the cart stuck, sending the top suitcase crashing to the ground. It burst open, spilling James's clothes across the polished airport floor. I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering his belongings as tears blurred my vision. A blue sweater, his favorite running shoes, the tie he wore to fancy dinners, each item I touched unleashed fresh waves of grief. "Let me help you, ma'am." An airport employee knelt beside me, gently collecting the scattered items. Her name tag read Gloria. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Are you all right?" The simple question broke something inside me. When was the last time someone had asked if I was all right? Not how soon I would get over it, or what practical steps I needed to take, but simply if I was okay. "My husband died," I whispered. "I just buried him in Singapore." Gloria's expression softened with genuine compassion. She helped me repack the suitcase in silence, then personally escorted me to the rideshare pickup area. "Is someone coming for you?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. My family is busy." Her frown spoke volumes, but she did not comment. Instead, she waited with me until the rideshare arrived, helped load my luggage, and squeezed my hand before I got in. "Take care of yourself," she said. It was more comfort than my own family had offered. The rideshare cost $78 due to rush hour pricing. The driver, an older man named Paul, made polite conversation as we navigated through heavy traffic. When he asked about my trip, I gave vague answers, afraid I would shatter completely if I spoke the truth aloud. He seemed to sense my distress and turned on soft music, occasionally pointing out changes to the city that had occurred in recent months. After nearly an hour, we pulled into my driveway. The house looked exactly as I had left it, yet completely different. James would never again open that front door, never again pull into this driveway, never again complain about the maple tree dropping seeds that clogged the gutters. Paul helped carry my luggage to the porch. As he set down the last bag, he hesitated. "Are you sure you're okay, miss? You seem, well, like you might need someone." I assured him I was fine, tipped him generously, and watched his taillights disappear down the street before fumbling with my house keys. The door swung open to reveal a cold, dark interior. I had asked my mother to adjust the thermostat the day before my arrival. She had apparently forgotten. Inside, stale air greeted me. Mail overflowed from the basket by the door, another task my family had promised to handle but clearly ignored. The refrigerator contained only expired condiments and a moldy container of something unidentifiable. My brother had assured me he would stock basic necessities before my return. Too exhausted to deal with any of it, I dragged myself upstairs to our bedroom. I could not bear to sleep in our bed. I curled up in the armchair by the window, still wearing my coat because the house was so cold. Surrounded by photographs of happier times, I finally allowed myself to break down completely. I woke hours later, disoriented and shivering. The house was silent in a way it had never been when James was alive. No footsteps in the hallway, no coffee maker gurgling downstairs, no off-key humming from the shower, just emptiness and the occasional creak of settling wood. James's closet door stood partially open, revealing the clothes he had left behind. My family had promised to organize his belongings to make my return easier. Inside, I found everything untouched. His shoes lined up precisely as he had left them. His favorite flannel shirt still hung on the hook where he had placed it the morning he left for Singapore. Every item exactly where it had been 6 months ago. Preserved like a museum of the life we once had. I sank to the floor of the closet, pulling his shirt into my arms, desperately searching for any lingering trace of his scent. There was nothing, just clean cotton and the faint mustiness of a space unopened for too long. I had carried pieces of him across the ocean only to find that the pieces I had left behind no longer felt like him at all. The morning arrived with a strange gurgling sound from downstairs. Stiff from sleeping in the chair, I made my way down to investigate. The noise grew louder as I approached the kitchen. When I flipped on the light switch, I gasped in horror. Water poured from a large crack in the ceiling, cascading down the walls and pooling across the tile floor. The temperature in the house had dropped even further overnight, and I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. I splashed through 3 inches of ice-cold water to reach the utility closet where the main water shutoff valve was located. The metal wheel was so cold it burned my fingers as I struggled to turn it. After several attempts, the flow of water finally stopped, but the damage was already extensive. Water had seeped under the hardwood floors in the dining room, causing them to buckle and warp. The drywall in the kitchen sagged dangerously, and water dripped from light fixtures, creating a hazardous electrical situation. The pipe must have frozen and burst during the recent cold snap. If someone had maintained proper heating in the house as promised, this never would have happened. I stood in my waterlogged kitchen, staring at the destruction, feeling oddly detached. After everything else, this almost seemed comical. Of course, my homecoming would include a flooded house. Outside, the temperature was dropping rapidly as another winter storm approached. The local news had been warning about it for days, according to notifications on my phone. My family must have known about the forecast when they suggested I drive carefully. Yet no one had thought to ensure the house was properly winterized or heated. I called an emergency plumber only to be told they were backed up for days due to similar issues across the city. "We are looking at Tuesday at the earliest," the dispatcher explained apologetically. "The storm has everyone calling in with burst pipes." My next call was to my brother. Troy answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted. "Hey, I can't really talk right now, getting ready for that dinner with the Wilsons I mentioned." "The house is flooded," I said flatly. "A pipe burst. There is water everywhere, and the plumber cannot come until Tuesday." "That sucks," Troy replied, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Did you try other plumbers? Maybe check Angie's List or something." "Troy, I just got back from burying my husband. I have been traveling for more than a day straight. I cannot stay here. There is water in the electrical fixtures and no heat. Could I possibly stay with you until this gets sorted out?" The silence that followed told me everything before he even spoke. "Actually, tonight is really bad timing. Lisa and I have the Wilsons coming over, clients I have been trying to land for months, and our guest room is full of Lisa's crafting supplies right now. Have you called Mom and Dad?" I ended that call and tried my parents next. My mother answered with immediate excuses. "Oh, honey. You know we would normally say yes, but the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow, and we have spent all day preparing. Plus, your father's back has been acting up. We just cannot handle guests right now." "What about a hotel? You should have insurance for that sort of thing." By this point, I had not eaten a proper meal in over 24 hours. The international travel, grief, and now this crisis had left me physically depleted. I felt lightheaded and nauseated as I tried to navigate through the flooded kitchen to find anything edible. The power flickered ominously as the storm outside intensified. I managed to locate a package of stale crackers in a cupboard and ate them mechanically while standing in water that had now soaked through my shoes and socks. My extremities were beginning to go numb from the cold, but I could not seem to make myself care enough to find dry clothes. Everything felt distant and unimportant. In a last desperate attempt to fix something, anything, I decided to check the electrical panel in the basement to see if I could at least get some heat working in part of the house. The basement stairs were slick with water, and I gripped the railing tightly as I made my way down. The musty space was partially flooded, with water reaching my ankles. I sloshed toward the electrical panel on the far wall, using my phone flashlight to guide me. As I reached for the panel door, my foot slipped on the wet concrete. I fell forward, my hand instinctively bracing against the metal box. A sharp jolt of electricity shot through my arm, throwing me backward. My head struck something hard as I fell, and for a moment, everything went dark. I came to on the basement floor, disoriented and shivering violently. My right arm tingled painfully from the electrical shock, and something warm trickled down the side of my face. When I touched my temple, my fingers came away red with blood. The fall had left a gash just above my eyebrow. Struggling to my feet, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The basement seemed to tilt and spin as I staggered toward the stairs. Each step required immense concentration. Halfway up, I had to stop and sit, my vision blurring at the edges. By the time I reached the main floor again, I was barely conscious. I collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, unable to go any further. The house had grown colder still, and I could no longer feel my fingers or toes. Some distant part of my mind recognized the symptoms of hypothermia setting in, but I could not summon the energy to care. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, a high-pitched beeping penetrated the fog in my brain. The carbon monoxide detector was going off. Something was wrong with the heating system, perhaps damaged by the water or malfunctioning due to the storm. The toxic gas was filling the house while I lay incapacitated, unable to reach help. My phone lay on the coffee table just inches from my hand, yet it might as well have been miles away. My limbs refused to cooperate, and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. In what I believed might be my final conscious moments, a strange calm settled over me. If this was how it ended, at least I would be with James again. At least the pain would stop. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness completely was the sound of someone pounding on the front door and a voice calling out. Then nothing but darkness. I later learned that Diane Foster, my neighbor from across the street, had noticed water flowing out from under my front door and down the porch steps. Concerned, she had tried calling first, then came over to investigate. When no one answered her knocks but she heard the carbon monoxide alarm blaring inside, she immediately called emergency services. The firefighters broke down the door to find me unconscious on the sofa. The house dangerously cold and partially flooded, with carbon monoxide levels well above the safety threshold, according to the paramedics who transported me to Portland General Hospital. I was suffering from moderate hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, a concussion, and the effects of an electrical shock. A few more hours and we would have been looking at a very different outcome. One of them reportedly told the emergency room doctor at the hospital. The medical team worked quickly to raise my body temperature and administer oxygen to counteract the carbon monoxide in my system. They cleaned and stitched the gash on my temple, monitored my heart for any arrhythmias caused by the electrical shock, and conducted neurological tests to assess the severity of my concussion. When they found my passport with the recent Singapore stamps and noticed my wedding ring, a compassionate nurse named Sarah gently asked about my circumstances in my semi-conscious state. I apparently told her everything: James's death, the overseas funeral, my family's response to my request for a ride, and returning to a cold, neglected house. Sarah documented it all in my medical chart. Concerned about my lack of support system upon discharge, what neither of us knew was that a local reporter named Michael Chen was at the hospital covering storm-related injuries for the evening news. He overheard a paramedic discussing my case in the break room, the bizarre confluence of tragedy that had led to a newly widowed woman being found near death in her own home. The human interest angle was too compelling to ignore, so Michael interviewed Diane, who shared that she had seen me arrive home by rideshare the previous afternoon. She looked exhausted, completely drained, Diane told the camera. I meant to go welcome her back, but with the storm coming, I got busy preparing my own house. I feel terrible now knowing what she was going through alone. He also spoke with the paramedics who responded to the call. One of them, visibly moved by the situation, shared the text message exchange he had seen on my phone, which was still open to the family group chat when they found me. Here is someone who just lost her husband asking her family for a simple ride from the airport, and they basically told her to get an Uber. Then she comes home to a house no one has checked on. It is just heartbreaking. By evening, the story had made it to the local news. Local woman returns from husband's overseas funeral to near tragedy. The report detailed how I had buried my husband in Singapore, traveled over 30 hours to return home, been denied basic support from family members, and then nearly died due to a preventable household emergency. Social media amplified the story rapidly. Screenshots of the text exchange, shared by someone at the hospital, spread across local community groups and eventually reached wider platforms. The contrast between my simple request and my family's dismissive responses struck a chord with viewers. The hashtag no worries began trending locally, with people sharing their own stories of family neglect during times of need. Local businesses responded with offers of assistance. A plumbing company volunteered to repair my pipes at no cost. A restoration service offered to handle the water damage. And a hotel chain provided a complimentary 2-week stay while repairs were completed. The community outpouring was overwhelming and unexpected. That evening, as the 10 o'clock news aired, with footage of emergency vehicles outside my house, my family saw their private conversation broadcast for all to see. According to the night nurse who was in my hospital room when they arrived, my brother Troy burst in first, his face ashen. "We just saw the news," he stammered. "They are making it sound like we abandoned you." My mother followed, already on the defensive. "This is a complete misrepresentation," she told the nurse before even acknowledging me. "We had no idea the house was in such condition. Amelia knows we would have helped if we understood the situation." My father stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. Only when the nurse stepped out did he approach my bed and ask quietly, "Are you going to be okay?" It was the first genuine question any of them had asked since James died. Within minutes of their arrival, my phone began ringing incessantly with calls from extended family and family friends who had seen the news report. My Aunt Susan called my mother directly, demanding to know why no one had gone to the airport. My father's boss texted to express concern and offer assistance. The family's carefully maintained image of loving support was crumbling under public scrutiny. As I drifted in and out of sleep, I could hear them in the hallway outside my room, arguing in hushed voices about how to fix the situation. Troy insisted they needed to get ahead of the story before it damaged his professional reputation. My mother worried about what her bridge club would think. My father suggested they simply move me to their house once I was discharged to show everyone they cared. Not once in their discussions did I hear genuine remorse or concern for my well-being. It was all about appearances, damage control, and their own discomfort. Even in this moment of crisis, they could not see beyond themselves. When the hospital social worker arrived to discuss my discharge plan, she brought news that the community support was continuing to grow. A local grief support group had reached out offering counseling services. A meal delivery service had donated 2 weeks of prepared meals. Several neighbors had volunteered to help with household tasks during my recovery. You have options, the social worker assured me. You do not have to go with your family if that is not what you want. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that I had a choice, that I was not obligated to accept help wrapped in obligation and self-interest simply because it came from blood relatives. As my family hovered anxiously, waiting to implement their damage control plan, I closed my eyes and thought of James. He had always encouraged me to stand up for myself with my family. Your worth is not determined by their ability to see it, he would say, and now, lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying alone in our home, I finally understood what he meant. By morning, my condition had stabilized enough for longer periods of consciousness. The hospital room felt crowded with my family's presence. They had taken shifts through the night, ensuring someone was always visible by my bedside, particularly when hospital staff entered the room. The performance was flawless, yet utterly hollow. Troy sat scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to ask if I needed anything, then returning to what appeared to be damage control on social media. My mother arranged and rearranged the few items on my bedside table, filling the silence with comments about how this whole situation had been blown completely out of proportion. My father stood by the window, periodically sighing and checking his watch, when Dr. Reynolds entered to discuss my condition and discharge plan. My mother immediately transformed, her voice softening as she touched my arm. We are just so grateful she is all right. We will be taking her home with us. Of course, our family sticks together during difficult times, the doctor nodded professionally while reviewing my chart. Mrs. Henderson has experienced significant trauma, both physical and emotional. Her recovery will require rest, proper nutrition, warm surroundings, and minimal stress. He looked directly at me, not my mother, as he spoke. What support system do you have in place, Amelia? Before I could answer, Troy jumped in. She has us. We are her family. There was just a misunderstanding about her arrival time yesterday, which the media has completely distorted. Dr. Reynolds maintained his professional demeanor. I see. And will someone be available to stay with her continuously for the next 48 hours? The concussion requires monitoring, and she should not be left alone. Of course, my mother replied smoothly. We have already prepared the guest room. I can rearrange my schedule to be home. A nurse named Jessica entered with my medication and a breakfast tray. She had been caring for me since early morning and had witnessed my family's performance shift whenever medical staff entered. As she checked my vitals, she quietly asked, "Are you comfortable with this plan, Amelia? Because there are alternatives if you need them." My mother stiffened. Alternatives? She is coming home with her family where she belongs. Jessica met my eyes steadily, ignoring my mother's interjection. The choice is yours, she said simply. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The choice was mine. Not what would make my family look good, not what would preserve their social standing, but what I actually needed. I took a deep breath. I would like to hear about the alternatives, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The room fell silent. Troy stopped typing mid-text. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. My father turned from the window with a frown. Amelia, my mother finally managed, you cannot be serious. After everything we have done, what exactly have you done? The question escaped me before I could reconsider. But once spoken, I could not take it back. Nor did I want to. When James was dying, you were too busy to come. When I buried him alone, you said flights were too expensive. When I needed a ride from the airport after 30 hours of travel, you suggested Uber. When I called about the burst pipe, you prioritized bridge club and business dinners. My voice remained calm, factual, rather than accusatory. So, please tell me what you have done that entitles you to control my recovery now that people are watching. Troy stood abruptly. That is completely unfair. We did not know how serious. You did not ask, I interrupted. Not once did any of you ask how I was really doing. Not once did you offer genuine help without excuses attached. You did not need to see me on the news to know I was grieving and alone. You chose not to see it. My mother's face flushed with indignation. We have always supported you, Amelia. Perhaps not in the exact way you wanted, but families cannot drop everything for every crisis. Your expectations are simply unrealistic. Needing a ride from the airport after burying my husband is an unrealistic expectation? I asked quietly. Hoping someone might have checked that the heat was working in my house during winter was asking too much? We are busy people, Troy insisted. We cannot be expected to remember every little detail, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Like whether your newly widowed sister might freeze to death in her own home. My father finally spoke, his voice subdued. Amelia, we understand you are upset. Grief can make people say things they do not mean. When you are thinking more clearly, I am thinking more clearly than I have in years, I interrupted. For the first time, I see our family dynamic without making excuses for it. I see that I have spent my entire life accepting scraps of attention and convincing myself it was a feast. Jessica had remained in the room, quietly arranging my medication. Her presence somehow gave me strength to continue. I do not hate you, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I do not even blame you for being who you are. But I will no longer pretend that you can give me what I need right now, or that you would even if you could. So what are you saying? My mother demanded. You would rather stay with strangers than your own family? I am saying I choose to prioritize my healing over maintaining our family's image. I choose to surround myself with genuine support rather than obligation disguised as care. The social worker, Miss Patel, entered with a folder of information. My family fell silent, aware of how a continued argument might appear. Miss Patel explained the community resources that had been arranged: a 2-week stay at the Riverview Hotel while my home was repaired, meal delivery services, transportation to medical appointments, and connection to a grief support group that met twice weekly. Several neighbors have also volunteered to check in regularly, she added. And the restoration company working on your house has offered to install a security system with remote monitoring to prevent future emergencies. The contrast between this outpouring from strangers and my family's reluctant, image-conscious support could not have been more stark. While my family stared in stunned silence, I accepted the arrangements presented by Miss Patel. This is ridiculous, Troy finally sputtered. You are choosing random people over your own blood. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I am choosing kindness over obligation. I am choosing to value myself enough to accept help that comes without conditions or resentment. My mother gathered her purse, her movements stiff with indignation. When you come to your senses, we will be waiting. But do not expect us to drop everything again when you decide you need us. That is exactly my point, I replied softly. I never could expect that, and now I no longer will. As they filed out of the room, my father lingered briefly at the door. For a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful, something that acknowledged the truth of what had happened. Instead, he simply nodded once before following my mother and brother. Jessica approached my bedside after they left. That took incredible courage, she said, adjusting my pillows. Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things to do, especially when you are vulnerable. It does not feel like courage, I admitted. It feels like giving up. You are not giving up, she corrected gently. You are giving yourself permission to heal without carrying their emotional baggage too. There is a big difference. That afternoon, representatives from the various community services came to coordinate my discharge plan. The hotel manager assured me that everything was prepared for my arrival. The restoration company showed me photos of the initial work they had done to prevent further damage to my home. The meal service coordinator discussed dietary preferences and delivery schedules. Each interaction reinforced what Jessica had said: this was not about rejecting family. It was about accepting genuine support without having to earn it or apologize for needing it. It was about recognizing that sometimes the family we are born into cannot provide what we need, and that is not a failure on our part. By evening, I was settled in a comfortable suite at the Riverview Hotel overlooking the river that gave the city its name. The room was warm, the bed soft, and a refrigerator had been stocked with simple, nourishing foods. On the desk sat a potted plant with a card signed by the hospital staff who had cared for me. For the first time since James died, I felt something besides grief and abandonment. It was not happiness, that still seemed impossibly distant. But perhaps it was the first fragile seedling of peace. I had stood in my truth, honored my needs, and discovered that there was kindness in the world beyond the narrow confines of familial obligation. As I watched the sun set over the river, I whispered to James as if he could hear me. I think you would be proud of me today. I finally did what you always said I should. I could almost hear his reply. I have always been proud of you. It was yourself you needed to make proud. 3 months passed in a blur of slow, steady healing. My physical recovery progressed more quickly than expected. The concussion symptoms faded after several weeks of rest. The electrical burn on my hand left only a faint mark that the doctor assured me would eventually disappear completely. The gash on my temple healed into a thin silver line, partly hidden by my hairline. The emotional healing proved more challenging, but equally possible. With the help of the grief support group that met in a cozy community center every Tuesday and Thursday, I began to process not only the loss of James but also the complicated feelings surrounding my family relationships. The group facilitator, Eleanor, had a gentle way of asking questions that helped me see patterns without judgment. Grief has a way of clarifying what truly matters, Eleanor often said. It strips away pretense and forces us to confront truth, both beautiful and painful. My house transformation mirrored my internal one. The restoration company not only repaired the water damage but made improvements I had never considered. They installed a smart thermostat I could monitor remotely, replaced the aging water heater with an energy-efficient model, and reinforced the plumbing system against future freezing. What began as destruction became an opportunity for renewal. Throughout this process, neighbors I barely knew before became regular fixtures in my life. Diane from across the street brought homemade soup every Sunday. Robert and Thomas from 2 doors down helped reinstall my garden beds when the yard work was completed. Maria, a retired teacher from the end of the block, simply sat with me on difficult days when words were unnecessary but presence was essential. My family maintained a careful distance. Occasional text messages arrived, superficially pleasant, but lacking any acknowledgement of our hospital room confrontation. My mother sent a generic thinking of you card signed by all 3 of them. Troy called once, ostensibly to check on me, but really to mention that his clients had seen the news story and he wanted to clarify any misconceptions. My father sent an email with links to home insurance information. His only concession that anything significant had happened. I responded politely but briefly to each contact, no longer expecting deeper connection or understanding. The boundary I had established in the hospital remained firm, not as punishment, but as protection for my healing heart. I could not afford to deplete my limited emotional resources on relationships that consistently took more than they gave. 6 months after James's death, I established the James Henderson Memorial Scholarship for International Education at our alma mater. Using the life insurance funds that had finally been processed, I created an endowment to help students study abroad with emergency support systems in place. The scholarship specifically covered emergency travel for family members and contingency funds for unexpected situations, exactly what I had lacked when crisis struck. Halfway around the world, working on the scholarship details gave me purpose during the darkest hours of grief. Each provision I included reflected a lesson learned through painful experience. Each safeguard represented a hardship that future students and their families might be spared. James had always valued education and opportunity. This felt like the perfect way to honor his memory while transforming my pain into something meaningful. On what would have been our 11th anniversary, I hosted a small gathering at my rebuilt home to announce the scholarship's first recipient. Close friends who had supported me through everything joined the celebration, along with new friends made during my recovery journey. My family received invitations but sent regrets, citing prior commitments. As I presented the scholarship certificate to Angela, a bright-eyed junior planning to study in Japan, I felt James's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of the love we had shared. His influence remained in how I approached challenges, in my capacity for resilience, and in my ability to create meaning from suffering. This scholarship exists because of a great love and a profound loss, I told the small audience gathered in my living room, but also because of an unexpected lesson: that family can be found in the most surprising places. Formed not necessarily by blood, but by who shows up when showing up matters most. The following week, I received a letter from my father. An actual handwritten letter, something I had never received from him before. Unlike the superficial communications of previous months, this one contained something rare. Reflection. I have been thinking about what happened after you returned from Singapore, he wrote. While your mother and brother may never see it clearly, I want you to know that I recognize our failure, not just in the practical matters of airport rides and house maintenance, but in the deeper obligation to provide comfort during your darkest hours. I have no excuses to offer, only a late and insufficient acknowledgement. The man you married would be proud of the woman you have become in his absence. Perhaps someday, if you are willing, we might find a way forward, not as we were, but as we could be. I did not respond immediately. The letter required contemplation, not reaction. I discussed it with my therapist, who had been helping me navigate grief and family dynamics for several months. What do you want from a relationship with your father? She asked. Not what you think you should want, or what might make him feel better, but what would actually serve your well-being. The question stayed with me for days. Eventually, I wrote back with boundaries and expectations clearly stated. I expressed willingness for occasional lunches, just the 2 of us, with the understanding that these meetings were exploratory, not obligatory. I would not be returning to family gatherings or holiday celebrations in the immediate future. Any relationship moving forward would be based on mutual respect and genuine connection, not performance or obligation. To my surprise, he agreed to these terms without argument. Our first lunch was awkward but civil. The second, slightly less so. By the third, we had found a careful rhythm of conversation that acknowledged our history without being defined by it. It was not the close father-child bond some might envy, but it was authentic in a way our previous relationship had never been. My brother and mother maintained their distance, occasionally sending holiday cards or impersonal gifts but never addressing the fundamental issues that had led to our estrangement. I accepted this as their choice and focused my energy on relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. A year after James's death, I stood alone at the airport waiting for a flight that would take me back to Singapore to visit his grave on the anniversary. As I watched families reunite around me, the embraces, the excited chatter, the genuine joy of reconnection, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was still sadness for what my own family could not provide, but no longer the desperate longing of before. I had learned that family could be created and chosen. That support could come from unexpected sources. That boundaries were not walls, but healthy filters that allowed the good in while keeping harm at bay. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not determined by others' ability to recognize it. As I boarded the plane, I thought about how differently this journey felt from my return trip a year ago. Then, I had been broken by grief and abandonment, desperate for connection and support that never came. Now, I carried within me a community of care that existed regardless of physical proximity. People who had shown up when it mattered most. People who continued to show up day after day, in ways both large and small. The greatest lesson from that terrible homecoming was not about my family's failures or the painful consequences that followed. It was about the remarkable capacity of human beings to step forward and hold space for each other's pain. About the healing power of being truly seen in your darkest moments. About the family we create when the one we were born into cannot meet our needs. If you have ever felt abandoned when you needed support most, please know that you are not alone. Your worth is not determined by others' capacity to recognize it. Sometimes the people we expect to be there for us simply cannot provide what we need, not because of our lack of value, but because of their own limitations. The challenge is to remain open to unexpected sources of care and connection, even when previous experiences make that openness feel dangerous. What unexpected sources of support have you discovered during difficult times? Have you ever been surprised by kindness from strangers when those closest to you could not provide what you needed? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be feeling alone in their struggles. Remember that your story matters, your boundaries are valid, and healing is always possible, sometimes in ways we never could have imagined. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.